discussing the situation in each of the country of the region related to the pandemics, but it's the first time we will be specifically looking at the economic resilience aspect. And so I'm very grateful to all our panelists and speakers to be there to discuss this really critical element for the future of Central Asia. I think that's something where the Central Asian states are especially interested in looking at. Of course, they also care about the health situation, but the economic aspect of the crisis is really strategic for them. So as you can see from our slide, we have a great group of speakers, and we will have 2 people to give some opening remarks, and then 4 panelists. 2 of them are author of a report just published by the International Tax and Investment Center on building resilience in Central Asia post-COVID-19. And then 2 other panelists will be discussing the report. So what I would like us to do is that all our speakers can mute themselves when they are not speaking, but keep their camera on. And for the audience, as we plan to have a lot of you, we already have 60 people, but the number is growing every minute. I ask you to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A box that you see on the right side of your screen, and I will be moderating the discussion by kind of compiling questions all together and distributing them to our speakers. So first, I would like to see for the opening remark if His Excellency Ambassador Vakhabov of Uzbekistan is there. I think they still are trying to join. They had some technical issues. So I would like to invite Daniel Witt, who is president of the International Tax and Investment Center, to give us some opening remark. Dan, the floor is yours. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Marlene. It's, again, a pleasure to be joining with your prestigious center at George Washington University to release this new ITIC paper. And you know better than most how important Central Asia is to the world. And this program that Ariel leads touches on 3 critical pillars: energy, growth, and security. And the paper, co-written by Ariel and our colleague James Grant, outlines the policy solutions for spurring economic recovery post-COVID in Central Asia. Compared to many parts of the world, Central Asia has been relatively successful in health terms. However, the economic impact has been quite significant. The predictions are for a fall in GDP in 2020 up to 5%. This fall of growth, combined with growing levels of debt, will severely limit the fiscal space as governments continue to invest in critical public health and other social safety net programs. Yet, at the same time, governments cannot abandon pro-growth measures to attract new investment, as we're seeing in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and this will spur the economic recovery. So it's this balance of the need for revenues, the need for growth, that's addressed by Ariel and James in our paper. And while the situation is severe, we're optimistic. You look back at the remarkable progress these countries of Central Asia have made in their 29 years since independence. We are confident that COVID will be yet another challenge that their resilience, their strength, and their good planning can overcome. And we believe, as we state in our paper, if addressed properly, these unprecedented challenges of COVID-19 could indeed result in a more market-oriented, competitive, prosperous, and open Central Asia. And that, as a backdrop, I look forward to a lively and rich discussion. Thank you again, Marlene. A pleasure to be joining with you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for your kind word. And I'm now happy to receive here Ambassador Vakhabov from Uzbekistan. Your Excellencies, it's a great honor to have you with us today. And I would like to give you the floor for a few minutes of opening remarks.
So very good morning to everyone. Marlene, so glad to see you. Again, it has been a while since we met last year. So first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the International Tax and Investment Center, in particular to Dr. Ariel Cohen and Mr. James Grant for the report Post-COVID-19 Building Resilience in Central Asia that contains a number of short and long-term policy recommendations for the leaders of the region to execute a sustainable recovery in the post-COVID period. So as it was rightly noted in the report, Central Asia showing its resilience during the pandemic is trying to turn the current challenges into bigger opportunity to facilitate more market-oriented, competitive, and diversified economy. So at present, as you may know, over 11,000 people are infected and more than 40 unfortunately died in Uzbekistan. So around 5 times more than first apex in April, when we had only 500 active cases. Unfortunately, reopened economy, easing quarantine measures, bringing back almost 70,000 of our citizens from abroad, dividing so the entire country into red, yellow, green zones didn't work as we had anticipated at the beginning. So cases rocketed both among locals and newly arrived. So 48% against 52, and starting from tomorrow, so July 10th, we are imposing strict lockdown again. So indeed, the number of patients is growing every day. And we understand if we do not introduce tough quarantine now, the situation will worsen. So every day, so the number of patients is increasing by 350 people. These are the statistics we know. So we do not have accurate data on asymptomatic carriers. There may be 2 to 3 times more. So if the situation worsens and 500, 1,000 or 1,500 patients are identified every day, so then this will be a collapse. So, and the system will not be able to withstand such a load. So in this regard to Uzbekistan, meanwhile, I mean, my country perceives pandemic as serious, probably the biggest challenge since the independence proclaimed that requires to pass the immediate test to sustain economic and social health. And the broader concept redefine more strategic and long-term goals that ensure the growth. It has hit the economy disruptively, even though Uzbekistan, among few countries in the world, is expected to have a positive trend. Only the one among OSCE members of GDP growth with 1.5% in 2020. It is 4% less than forecasted in the beginning of the year. So as an immediate response to mitigate COVID-19 pandemic, we created a range of measures to support entrepreneurs, including the anti-crisis fund of $1 billion, deferred enterprise taxes for 6 months, and reduced the personal income tax for businesses. Moreover, additional $3.1 billion long-term loans were taken from international financial institutions. So nevertheless, there are 69,000 businesses are not operating yet. 23,000 of which were opened new in 2019. So we target to animate 70% by October and hopefully 100% by the end of this year. So in longer run, we clearly realize our challenges and do not hide them. We openly talk about them and seek for partnership to overcome together. So in my country sees following areas as key to boost economic resilience. And among them are, first, of course, ensuring economic and financial stability. So second, mitigating with unemployment. that is also increasing nowadays, up to 2.3 million people known as unemployed. So third, implementing robust reforms in the banking system. Fourth, attracting foreign direct investments. And fifth, increasing export and securing foreign exchange earnings. Another priority that we put forward is to ensure competitive industry. Facilitating and supporting SMEs comes seventh priorities that has been outlined by the president. And of course, the last one is a widespread adoption of digital technology in all sectors. So to conclude, the current pandemic fixes new bars to be stronger than ever before and give a boost to those pivotal reforms to address the long-term social and economic issues we are all facing in our economies. Again, Marlene, thank you so much for your attention and giving this opportunity to highlight the current situation in Uzbekistan in a pandemic period.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for giving us this update of the situation in Uzbekistan, and we hope this kind of second phase of the lockdown will help managing and slowing down the new wave of pandemics. Thank you so much for being with us today. Now I would like to give the floor to first two of the author of the report on resilience. First, Ariel Cohen, who is a senior fellow at the International Tax and Investment Center, and then James Grant, who is a research fellow there. And you can read their bio more in details on our website. I don't want to take too much time because we really have a lot to discuss here. So Ariel and James, I give you the floor, and then we will move to our two other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene, and thank you, GW. This is our third, I believe, or fourth joint event, and we really appreciate our cooperation with Marlene. I would like to also highlight the Energy Growth and Security Program at the International Tax and Investment Center, ITICnet.org. Our report is published on the ITIC website in iticnet.org/resources. Please acquaint yourself with the report if you're interested. I really appreciate the frankness with which Ambassador Vahabov addressed the current challenges. This is indeed a stress test for countries big and small, for the United States, for France, for Uzbekistan, for Kazakhstan, for China, and others. And we will learn a lot because it's simultaneous and it's multifaceted. It's health, it's economy, it's IT. We will learn a lot. What is the resilience of our countries? What are the economic strengths? What are the social cohesion, etc. And I must say, I was very worried initially, but I was hopeful because the numbers in Central Asia were not very high. We saw several thousand of cases, a few hundred deaths here and there. And if you go now and look, despite the high spread of the disease, still the per capita, per 100,000 of the population, the numbers in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan are not so high. The mortality is not so high, even in relation to the developed world. Why? Because unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, the reporting is still not uniform between different countries. So while in some cases, people report the death from COVID, but if a person has COVID and died from a heart attack or from cancer or from brain hemorrhage, it is not reported as COVID. So one of the challenges for WHO, and unfortunately the US is pulling out of WHO, is to have uniform reporting requirements so we can have a real picture for that. Specifically about our report and Central Asia. There is a medical challenge. The countries were not prepared for an epidemic, for a pandemic of this scope. The United States was not either. The writing was on the wall for 20 years. They were saying since SARS-1, a major viral infection may come and be extremely disruptive. What did the authorities do here in the United States? They stored a lot of equipment. They used it in different epidemics since we were not prepared. In Central Asia, in a place like Kazakhstan, the medical system received a lot of investment and got upgraded. In other places, not so much. What stands out to me is what I call the ostrich policy. When the government will not admit that they have COVID cases, and of course you know which country I'm talking about. They behave as if they have cases, they impose quarantines, but they will not tell us that they have even one case. I guess this is a part of 360-degree neutrality. I still don't name the country. You go, you figure it out. In terms of the immediate response, clearly the countries will have to deal with the infection and with public information. I've done public information as a consultant since mid-90s. It's scary to admit, since 1990s, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to explain to people in the way that they don't understand and trust that it's not a good thing not to wear a mask. It's not a good thing not to keep social distance and, God forbid, get infected. But this is a challenge we all are facing, including in Central Asia. So I mentioned before, the numbers were low in April. They stopped the quarantine and the numbers skyrocketed, just like in Florida here. That means, for example, in Uzbekistan, Ambassador Vahabov mentioned they're reimposing quarantines. In Kazakhstan, they reimposed from the 5th of July for 2 weeks. And unfortunately, President Tokayev even announced a day of national mourning for those who lost their loved ones. It is indeed a very somber occasion. I think it's on the 13th of July, if I'm not mistaken. Next, safety nets are very important, social safety nets. If a person had a job and lost a job, if a small business closed down, the people live paycheck to paycheck, or they're day workers. They live day to day, mouth to mouth. You have to help these people. Those who know me know I'm not a socialist. I'm not a supporter of a welfare state, but this is an emergency. This is when the state has to provide. How? Among other things, by borrowing. This is the time where the international financial institutions can step up to the plate and provide the necessary funds to upgrade the health system, to provide this emergency assistance. The scary thing is that the danger is if the pandemic continues for so long, even the IFIs will not have the money in order to support this tens and hundreds of millions of people around the world that run out of their livelihood. Next, as Ambassador Vahabov mentioned, invest in virtual governance. You need those services that the government's provided before face-to-face in an office to shift it online. And of course, it's more challenging in a place like Tajikistan, in a place like a mountain village in Kyrgyzstan. Of course, the Astanas, the Nur Sultan and Almaty and Shymkent and Tashkent are going to be better than a village in the mountains or in the desert, but the effort needs to be made for that. The other thing is, and I will not hog the whole report because my colleague James Grant is standing by, I want to make one point. Central Asia is a major exporter of hydrocarbons. If you take China, out of 50 BCM, billion cubic meters of gas a year that they import from the region, 30 comes from Turkmenistan, 10 from Kazakhstan, and 10 from Uzbekistan. The Chinese purchases dropped 30% in case of Turkmenistan, 20% in case of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. This is a time to realize for these countries. Of course, oil prices, we saw. Dan just sent me an article. Oil prices collapsed earlier this year to minus $37 a barrel. So people were paying to take oil off their hands. So now it's 40, okay, it's better. But we are looking at the fact that over-reliance and over-dependence on hydrocarbons is not a good idea. This is a time for these countries to diversify their energy production, to bring more renewables, maybe to shift from coal to gas. There's a lot of things they can do, and there are resources. There are a lot of sun exposure in the southern parts. There are a lot of wind in Kazakhstan. They can and should be moving towards the renewables. To conclude, the COVID stress test for Central Asia is indeed the biggest challenge since the independence 30 years ago. And of course, there was the challenge of radical Islamic movements that could have shaken the states, but luckily enough, it did not happen. The countries must keep their food supply chain intact, borders open, very important that the movement of people is not totally clogged, stopped, impeded. If these are people who are repatriating to their countries, a lot of migrant workers who were thrown out of Russia and need to go back home to Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, etc. And in this crisis, while the challenges, economic, social, medical, must be addressed, of course they must be addressed, this is not the time to engage in crackdowns, to further delimit people's freedoms. On the contrary, in partnership, the governments and the people can work together and get a better sense of cohesion. And from this cohesion comes the resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ariel. James, I give you the floor.
Hey, thank you, Marlene. I'd like to echo Ariel's gratitude to the Elliott School Central Asia program, to Jeanette, to the ambassador. Also, a special thanks to our intern team. Our lead research intern was Raushan Zadanyeva. We have Reagan Abner, Karoy Barabasi, Bogdan Puchkov, David Pasmanik, and Jana Serbalatsi. Our intern team proved to be very resilient throughout this process. Without them, this report would not be possible, so thank you to them. I'll try to be brief here as we have a full house, and I do want to yield as much time as possible to discussion with our expert panel. But as mentioned, the keystone of this report is the concept of resilience. And how we ended up defining resilience in our paper is the ability of people, communities, governments, and their systems to withstand the impacts of negative events and to continue to grow despite them. Now, resilience is a term in international development circles that's typically reserved for discussions of climate change and natural disasters, how to adapt to them and mitigate against those disasters. And it works well, it's a great term. But what we set out to do was to piggyback on this great concept and expand it beyond the environmental to also encompass the economic, the social, and the political. So when we talk about Central Asia's resilience to the COVID threat, we're obliged to look at a mix of short, medium, long-term policy solutions that will help the region not only weather the storm, but emerge stronger, as my colleague Ariel was saying, with more competitive economies, more robust civil society, and overall improved quality of life for all of Central Asia's citizens. So how did we go about this in our report? What we did was we identified 4 key pillars of resilience building that each contain a mix of these short, medium, long-term policy actions that we believe the governments of Central Asia should set out to achieve. So what are those? The first, the creation of crisis management policies. Now, Central Asia is no stranger to crisis planning. Unfortunately, the region is prone to natural disasters like earthquakes and droughts. And to that extent, they have taken some commendable steps in crisis mitigation planning. Kazakhstan has its Committee of Emergency Situations. The UN has a regional program making cities resilient in Central Asia. So these governments are used to, on some level, although albeit probably more natural disaster specific, they are familiar with crisis planning. But what we're advocating for in the report is increased integration of crisis planning through all levels of government. So not just the top level, but also down to the local level. Investing in research to better prepare for and predict crises, and perhaps even going so far as to create dedicated government ministries with the mandate of resilience building. Our second pillar here is economic diversification. Ariel mentioned the potential threats and risks of having a monoculture economy. Now, we're advocating for accelerating Central Asia's shift away from commodity-driven economies towards the knowledge-based economy, manufacturing, services, high tech. So we only need to look at the price fluctuations of oil, gas, and base metals and see the impact on Central Asia's economy to see that this region is incredibly vulnerable to swings and vagaries of commodity markets. So how can we diversify away? We can shift to green energy, and there's enormous potential there. The Kazakh steppe, there's tremendous amounts of solar radiation. Maybe not so much offshore wind, but there are green options. But it's an uphill battle. I think right now the numbers we have, the price per kilowatt hour for photovoltaic is 5 times more expensive than coal. So you're paying 7 to 8 tenge, which is about 2 cents for a kilowatt hour generated on a coal plant versus 34 tenge, or about 10 cents coming from solar. So there are a lot of obstacles to overcome, but the potential is there. The other side of economic diversification, and this was slightly touched upon by the ambassador and Ariel and Dan as well, is the remittance economy. So how do we sort of reduce that dependency on remittances? What we need first is the short term. So we need to provide stimulus and immediate retraining for some of these returning migrant workers that were literally kicked out of the countries that they were working in, but also longer term investments in education and retraining for these workers. And perhaps there's room for them in manufacturing and boosting the green economy. The third pillar was monetary, fiscal, tax, and regulatory policy adjustments. So here I'll make a plug for our soft infrastructure report, which we actually did present with Marlene last year, and it goes over a number of these policy recommendations for the region, what these governments can do to promote long-term sustainable growth. So in order to protect the livelihoods of the region's citizens, we need resources. So that means investment needs to continue flowing. We need to reduce barriers to FDI. We need more business-friendly and transparent tax codes. We need to resist urges of protectionism, short-term tax breaks where necessary. The ambassador mentioned, reduced income taxes in Uzbekistan, which is a great idea. Anti-crisis funds. That's the exact sort of thing that we need to be doing in the short term to help build resilience. And also, to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan's credit, both countries have actually been shooting up the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. And this shows that they are on the right path here to building longer term, more business-friendly environments. Our final pillar was food security. If food supply chains collapse, that's pretty much it. That's one of the most dangerous things that could happen to a society. So it's critical that food supplies continue to flow. So this means to prevent social unrest, we need to improve diversity of imports. A lot of Central Asia, they have what I would describe as food insecurity in terms of their suppliers. There are very few suppliers for their for food imports, so we need to diversify those. We need to improve domestic agricultural capacity, help these countries produce their own goods and improve agribusiness, increase in the short-term government aid to farmers, and in the long-term capacity building for agribusiness, and also including and expanding financing and education for farmers. So those are our four main pillars. I encourage you all listening to please check out the report and look at some of these more in depth. But right now I do want to hand over time to our other esteemed panelists and get going with the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much, James. And indeed, now I would like to invite our first panelist, Javier Piedra, who is the Deputy Assistant Administrator of the Bureau of Asia at USAID, to give us his feedback and comments on the report.
Thank you, Marlene, and thank you, Ariel. Last time I saw you was in Astana, actually. I think at the International Expo. And so it's good to see you. And Mr. Ambassador, it's good to see you. I've spoken with you twice this week. Let me, first of all, good morning to all. I'll be relatively brief, but I'd first like to thank GW University and the International Tax Investment Center for organizing this today. I will like to commend the previous speakers for their insights. I'd like to comment on USAID's vision in Central Asia in light of the Central Asia strategy. And I'd like to give my feedback on one or two points mentioned in the paper because of the importance of this issue. But first of all, let me make a few points about myself and then USAID. And the only point I'll make about myself is that I lived in Central Asia for 16 years full time. And so I know the area quite well. And then USAID, for those who don't know, and there are people who don't know, is the world's premier international development agency and a catalytic actor driving development results throughout the world. USAID's work advances U.S. national security and economic prosperity, demonstrates American generosity, and promotes a path to recipient self-reliance and resilience. That's right on our front page, resilience. And really that's what we're talking about today at a time of crisis. We are a development agency as well as a humanitarian agency. And that's what people very often forget. And we are like, if I may risk the comparison a little bit, like the World Bank and the IMF in a single bucket. What do I mean? The IMF largely addresses short-term issues related to liquidity and economic adjustment from shocks, while the World Bank works towards longer-term solutions to achieve sustainable development. We work on short-term and long-term problems and bring a country to self-reliance in a way that hopefully they're resilient over the long term. We're a development organization. And one other important point is that there's been a lot of discussion so far, and I agree with it, that countries in the region need to take out loans to address this issue. We don't give loans, we give grants. And we have quite a bit of resources available, and I think the folks in each of the countries there know that. And I would like to say that because of the importance of this, we're opening 2 new full missions in Central Asia, in Tashkent and in Dushanbe. And this is a testimony to the commitment we have to the region. One observation in connection with the paper, and I think it's a very fair point that was made. And I'm just going to read the sentence. With cross-border trade volumes and commodity prices at historic lows due to COVID lockdown measures, the region's national governments are straining to implement policy measures that address both disease containment and economic stimulus. A difficult balancing act that, if executed poorly, could significantly exacerbate the consequences of coronavirus. If managed deftly, however, policy responses to COVID-19 threat could ultimately make the region more competitive, more productive, and resilient to future crises. And I think that's a very fair statement. And I commend you for that, because I think in Central Asia, there has been an enormous amount of optimism in themselves and in the region collectively. And I think these are two important factors that lead to this optimism and ability to address these issues that are complicated by COVID. And we've been, let me just say, we've been in the region for 25 years, USAID, and we're going to continue to be in the region. And we're now increasingly working and trying to integrate activities with Afghanistan. Let me just make one or two quick points on the Central Asia strategy, because this is an interagency U.S. government effort, initiative. And it was updated since the 2015 strategy because, well, you know, new leaders in the region have created new openings for reform-oriented development, inter-regional connectivity, cooperation, greater U.S. engagement. The new governments in the region have indicated a deeper commitment to pursue political and economic reform, including through bilateral cooperation with the United States. And this has been manifest. These are not just words. These are very clearly manifested. And last week with Secretary Pompeo, we had a C5+1 meeting with the 5 foreign ministers, as well as with the U.S. ambassadors and the country ambassadors in the United States. And I think that was a very additional important step in working with Central Asia, with a large focus of that discussion on COVID and activities related to what the ambassador has mentioned, what Ariel has mentioned, what James has mentioned, Marlene, Dan, and the others here. So I'm not going to go through those. And I was going to go through the paper, but it was just done. James just did it. So I'm going to skip over this. Let me just make a few other points that I think are important here. Central Asia is a region important in itself, not because of what surrounds it or because of Afghanistan to the United States. It is important in itself. Point one, the U.S. development efforts should foster regional independence and not create dependencies. That's another fundamental assumption under the strategy. And then I will comment on 3 of the 6 overarching objectives of the strategy very quickly. Indicating, of course, that we align our resources to the strategy, not the other way around. And 2, we are also, let me just mention very quickly, we're working closely with the EU because they just came out with their Central Asia strategy, and there's a lot of overlap between the US and the EU strategies. In terms of some of our, the 3 of the 6 points in the Central Asia strategy, which are because it guides us, right, to support and strengthen the sovereignty and independence of the Central Asian states individually and as a region. Okay. The U.S. engagement must be consistent with economic, energy, security, democracy, and governance issues. 2 is to promote rule of law, reform, and respect for human rights. And we have projects in all of these areas in all 5 countries. And then to promote United States investment in and development of Central Asia. And this is the whole point of the economy, which the ambassador mentioned, and I would add increasing access to credit, bridge financing. We are assuming this is a liquidity problem, not a solvency problem. And so that's a very important distinction to address issues related to liquidity rather than to a solvency issue, because then you go into a whole different way of thinking in terms of approach. And then a couple more quick points that mentioned quality infrastructure. And I would like to raise again something that's important for the USG is the Blue Dot Network, which is related to infrastructure, digital infrastructure as well, and the communications and information security. top priority, and then food and energy security and private sector engagement. Okay, and we're working on all of these fronts. And what this leads to, of course, or underpins this is accountability, transparency, to safeguard sovereignty and independence under a democratic system. Okay, now let me just finally just 2 or 3 little things here.
If you could relatively fast, I'm sorry,
Yes.
because we still need some time for
All right,
Eric
okay.
and
Let
questions.
me then just say that we're very deep into this energy issue of the Central Asia regional electricity market, water management, trade issues, and reducing barriers to entry. And so I'll end with that. And I'd just like to flag one point, which was mentioned in the pre-call, which was the use of the word relatively moderate to describe COVID-19 is not entirely accurate, but that's been recognized because this the paper was written a month ago. And so I'm just, as we upgrade the facts, we have to, our understanding, we need to, of course, change some of our strategy and programming. So sorry I took a little bit long, but those are some of the points that I wanted to make for discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Marlene.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Now I would like, last but not least, to give the floor to Eric Livni, who is a lead regional economist for Central Asia at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Please confirm.
Yes, yes, it works.
Yes.
Thank you. I will not focus. I will not speak about the entire report. I will speak probably to one aspect of it, one aspect of resilience, and this is something that is very common to all of the Central Asian countries, the preeminence of something we call by this acronym SME, small and medium enterprise. Some countries in Central Asia have more oil, others have less of it, some have gold and other metals. But what is really common is that the bulk of employment in all Central Asian countries is not in oil, gas, or gold. It's actually in small, medium enterprises, in agriculture, much of it traditional, low productivity, and in trade. So these are very small companies that we're talking about.
Eric, I'm sorry, we don't hear you very well. It's kind of, could you speak at least loudly more, and that would help, I'm sure. Thank you.
Okay, how is
Perfect.
it now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just holding the microphone. I hope you did hear what I said earlier. This is the little introduction. Wonderful. I grew up in Israel. And I'm saying that not in order to tell you about my personal sort of story growing up, but some 30 odd years ago, I was actually very young, didn't have much education or any, in fact, and I was employed on a farm, a very small farm, just 1 hectare. And I was given training of maybe half a day, how to pick flowers, how to put them in 5s and 25s with a rubber, how to then put, when I had enough, in a bucket, put all my buckets in a refrigerator. And by the time I had enough of these buckets, all I had to do was to take a phone. There was a phone conveniently hanging on the wall on the farm, and call a telephone number. And in the same day, closer to the evening, a refrigerated truck would appear right at the farm's gate and pick up my flowers, just a small number of buckets, and take them to the airport. And from there to Holland, to, as we all know, the major flower market where all the trades are made. I didn't have much control over what happened to my flowers from the moment they left the farm gate. But the one thing I do know is that I did get paid at the end of the day. So it means that the whole logistics chain worked. Now, why do I tell story to our audience? Well, because this is how a very small farm, a very small business enterprise got connected to the global market. You need a very good organization. It's not about giving a little bit of money to every small business to keep them afloat at a difficult time, which is also important to do. But if we want our economists, and the Central Asian economists in particular in this discussion, if we want them to be diversified, if we want them to do things other than oil, gas, or gold, we need to improve the organization. It's not about, again, just deferring certain payments or providing subsidies or reducing the tax burden. It's not even about things such as promoting country standing and doing business. The World Bank's doing business index is a very good one. But if even if you advance many steps in this index, it doesn't necessarily mean that you improve the organization. It doesn't necessarily mean that SMEs in your country will have access to global markets. It will be very easy to register them, but it doesn't mean that they will be able to sell whatever they produce outside. So this is my really major point, because all the Central Asian countries, this is the one characteristics they have in common. And for many years, we keep hearing diversification, but we are exactly where we were 10, 15 years ago in terms of shares of SME in employment, in terms of if you look at export innovation, there's very little of it. We are exporting pretty much the same goods that we used to export 10, 15 years ago. Prices are changing, the global markets are changing, we are living through different crises, but very little changes domestically. Some countries have more resources, like Kazakhstan, so they provide massive subsidies through different programs. Even with those subsidies, they are still not having a lot of progress in terms of diversification. I think one country which really stands out in Central Asia in this regard is Uzbekistan, and I'm very glad that we have His Excellency, the Ambassador, on this panel. I think Uzbekistan is really one country in Central Asia that is approaching the problem with the right tools in hand. And the tool is specifically organizational tools. They're not so much about, throwing resources like SMEs or the industry, broadly speaking. It's really about improving the organization. So I'll give you just one example. The EBRD, where we are currently supporting we're supporting many such projects, but one example I would like to give you is that of Indorama. It's a project that is a major FDI project located in Fergana, and it's about processing cotton into yarn. It also some other activities. But the way this is organized, it's really telling. So the project is organized in such a way that you have a processing company at the center, but then you have attached to it, you have small producers. So you have a regional organization whereby local farmers, many of them, are connected to a central hub, a company that is buying their product. I would say they're almost vertically integrated, even though this is fairly informal. And so you have a connection between the small farmer and the global market, because the company eventually exports through its global marketing network. So if we pursue such a strategy of connecting small producers to larger companies that can aggregate, can increase the scale, can add value, and eventually connect small producers to the global markets, this is how we can be successful in promoting diversification. But I see very little of it outside of Uzbekistan. In my opinion, Uzbekistan is really showing the way, and we will soon see the results in just a matter of a year or two. And the reason we are all projecting that Uzbekistan will continue to grow even in this difficult year, and our focus is also positive. Again, we may have to update it soon because the COVID pandemic is having a second wave in Uzbekistan as well. But nevertheless, the reason we think Uzbekistan will be more resilient is precisely because it is better organized. It is better organized, it's more diversified already, and it's doing more to diversify itself even further. And I really commend Uzbekistan for its industrial policy in this regard. It was very successful, for many years. In fact, I think it goes way back, and now we are really reaping the benefits of the investment that has been made previously. Let me stop here, and I hope we will continue this discussion, which I enjoyed very much so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your comments. I propose now we move to the discussion. There are several questions. We don't have a lot of time. Officially, we still have 7 minutes, but I hope each of you can stay a few more minutes after 12 so we can address several of the questions. Your Excellency, there were several questions that were specifically for you. So if you agree, I would like to begin with question for you, and then I will compile the question for the report itself. Two questions addressed to you. One about the situation at the border with Kazakhstan, where it seems several hundred, if not thousands, of both Uzbek and Tajik migrants are blocked because of the lockdown. And so we wanted some of our audience, and especially Raushan, that was mentioned as one of the co-author, one of the intern of the report, is asking you, could you give us an update of how the situation is going there for this migrant block at the border, and if there is any way to kind of find a solution to have them entering the country? And another question was about that the Uzbek government is thinking about offering basic income to its population during the lockdown. It's something that Kazakhstan has been doing. It can be costly, it can be maybe not efficient, but we would like to know how this is addressed and discussed by the Uzbek government. And that would be the two questions for you. Thank you so much.
So Marlene, thank you so much for these questions. So with respect to our citizens who are in stock abroad. So as you may know, since the pandemic began to spread across the globe, we've been able to bring back more than almost 70,000 Uzbekistanis from abroad. And the total number of all our compatriots who have returned to Uzbekistan is almost 500,000 people. So in this regard, just wanted to let you know that so the current administration, in particular the president of Uzbekistan, remained very, very much committed to bringing all of them back home. And just yesterday, during the video conference call with the members of his cabinet, so the head of state again has outlined that the government will take all measures to repatriate our citizens, in particular those who are in stuck at the border between Kazakhstan and Russia. So, but these measures will be taken gradually. So the Uzbekistan Airways company is rescheduling its flights, and hopefully, so by this means, we'll be able to bring all of them back home. So with respect, in this regard, just wanted to point it out that a couple of weeks ago, again, thanks to the government's tireless efforts, we've been able to repatriate more than 500 Uzbekistanis who were stuck here in the US and neighboring Canada. So there were two special charter flights that delivered all of them back home. And nowadays we see that even these numbers are increasing on a regular basis. So we are enlisting these people. Hopefully in the nearest future we'll be able to request another special charter flights. So with respect to your second question, so indeed, the entire country will be locked down tomorrow, and these measures include stay-at-home orders for all the people all the people in Uzbekistan. So beside that, international flights that we've resumed starting from June 15th will be suspended as well. With respect to reopening the schools, so we are still thinking of that, and everything will depend on the cases of COVID-19 that are still being confirmed, and this number is growing. So by this means, we will mitigate the pandemic. So gatherings, weddings, funerals, so all public events will be also suspended. So beside that, we are attracting our police, so law enforcement agencies to enforce all these quarantine measures. So that's the way how we'll be tackling the current challenges. And the one more point that I would like to stress on. So I mentioned how the healthcare facilities.
If you can very briefly, Mr.
Yes.
Ambassador, I'm sorry, so we can
Yes,
have,
of course.
if you can very briefly summarize it, thank you.
Sure, last point. So the reasons why we are imposing tough measures, again, are obvious. The number of patients is growing every day. So we are running out of resources now. So the beds are full, all doctors work for 14 days and then are being quarantined. So there are no doctors left, so there are no vacant beds as well. And asymptomatic patients were allowed to be treated at home. So there is a lack also 22,000 tests per day. So and previously the results were ready in a few hours. Now it takes several days. So this is so by this means we would like just to stop the spread of this disease. Again, thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now I would like to address, so I tried to compile the several questions we had from the audience into 3 big blocks, and I would like now to give the floor for answer to our 2 authors, and of course inviting our 2 discussants to join also, but relatively briefly. So one block of question was about, it's very good to work on economic recovery and resilience. What about the resilience of social protection systems? How do you address that in the report, the fact that these social protection systems that have been largely destroyed the last 30 years, how do you think they should be rebuilt and improved to help the population, especially the most vulnerable people, to deal with the crisis as we have it now? That was question 1. A second block of question is about foreign aid. Do you envision foreign aid to be growing towards Central Asia as a response to the crisis? And in that case, does that mean that foreign donors are kind of revisiting the way, the direction of their aid into some specific sector? And one of the key questions for the region, it's of course the accountability and the transparency of the fund in a region where corruption is very high. So how can we both help the region by sending more money, but also being sure that the funds are well distributed and we can have the governments accountable for the way they are spending the foreign money? And the third group of questions, more technical, were about the diversification of supply chain and the role that governments can play in trying to diversify this supply chain, and the fact that even if renewable energy has been growing in the region, it hasn't changed the general energy direction and the rent linked to energy in the region. So how would you address that also? So I know it's a huge question and we have very few time, but these 3 blocks if you could briefly address them, and maybe I will give the floor to Ariane or James, whoever wants to begin with. Ariel, we don't hear you. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Let me begin briefly, because we're running out of time, addressing the three groups of questions. First, I do not agree that the safety net was destroyed. Safety net in the region was reformed because the region transitioned slowly with a lot of difficulty, more than, let's say, in the Baltic states or Georgia or even Russia. It transitioned from the Soviet model to the post-Soviet market-oriented model. In that model, people were supposed to work and earn income, not getting handouts from the government. This situation is an emergency and it's different. That's why people will be receiving for a limited period of time some kind of government assistance. Generally speaking, I think guaranteeing income is not a good idea. Finland tried it and gave it up. But right now, if you set it up with a sunset provision, let's say for 2 months, and then it goes out and people have to go back to work, I think that's okay because you're in an emergency. Second of all, when you give out assistance, any assistance anywhere in the world, there have to be audits. The question is there government capacity in countries like that? I'm pretty sure Kazakhstan can handle it. Kazakhstan, and I deal with Kazakhstan, they are extremely focused on audit procedures, to my taste, too bureaucratic, but they will handle it. I'm not as experienced about Uzbekistan. I haven't been in Uzbekistan for over 15 years. I think any country that wants to know what's happening with the funds they're giving out needs to audit and double check that people, A, have the need. It has to be needs-based. If a person is a millionaire, he or she should not receive $1,000 a month or even $200 a month. In terms of supply chain, absolutely vital thing. The supply chain, this is the time to build more food processing capacity throughout the region, and the region has to stay integrated. They should not build up, like some countries did, walls that prevent food from being exported. If they have a surplus food that they can sell to the neighbors, what is better than helping your neighbor in the time of need? In terms of other supply chains, medical equipment, simple things like masks. I'm sure countries in the region can produce masks if they produce fabric, and we know they produce cotton, so they can produce cotton fabric and make the masks. I should stop here and probably let James answer the rest of it. James? James?
All right, unmuted, great.
Right.
Yeah, I think to the supply chain question, I think we should really remember what Mr. Livni said from EBRD. If you strengthen small and medium-sized enterprises, these are the small companies, these are the trucking companies, these are the small farmers. All the steps along the way, the logistics chain, are comprised of small and medium-sized enterprises. So when we support those with stimulus and tax breaks, that's a fantastic way to increase the robustness and resilience of your supply chains. For the foreign aid question, maybe we could have DAA Piedra chime in, but I know that Uzbekistan did just receive 3.1 billion, I believe, from the ADB. The World Bank is getting involved as hundreds of millions of dollars. In Kazakhstan, they have a $500 million livestock beef breeding program. So there is aid going into the region, certainly. To the extent that it will increase or decrease, I'm not sure, but maybe I would defer to our USAID panelist on the foreign aid question.
Yeah, this is Javier. Thank you, James. Just 2 or 3 quick points. One is we have regional and bilateral programs. We are opening, as I mentioned earlier, 2 new missions, which is a significant event in the world of today. Resources will continue moving into Central Asia. I absolutely loved the EBRD Livni's diversification anecdote. I think it's absolutely important to carry on with that. And in terms of monitoring and evaluation, we have very robust systems in place to ensure that U.S. taxpayer money is being spent appropriately. And it's so robust that rarely does anyone ever hear anything over years and years that something has gone wrong. Sometimes it's a little bit too bureaucratic, but we'll continue in the region. The final point is the EU. I would encourage everyone to read the EU's Central Asia strategy and the increasing resources that they have. That's public. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. Eric, did you wanted to add something?
Just a couple of words. You know, on social protection, if you don't mind, even though it's not exactly EBRD's cup of tea, but nevertheless, I have kids who are 14 and 15 right now, and we often discuss history. They don't know much about Soviet, but the one thing we kind of concluded in the family is that everything Soviet was pretty bad, but the only thing that is worse than Soviet is post-Soviet. So when I was talking about post-Soviet social protection, I was, you know, this is what I remembered. You know, the social protection system was pretty much destroyed overnight, I would say. It started being destroyed already in Gorbachev era, probably. But then it completely vanished into thin air. And people were essentially sent into their villages for survival. I now live in Georgia, and I see that happening still today. People survive on their own plots of land in autarky. There's very, very little cash, and that's sort of the modus operandi of so many households in the whole Central Asia and the whole of the post-Soviet space, if you wish. Now, again, I would like to conclude maybe by pointing out to one country that stands out in this regard. And again, this country is Uzbekistan. You know, Uzbekistan has something that others do not have, and that is a social structure called mahalla. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And this structure survived despite everything else that was destroyed in the process. And the government of Uzbekistan works through these structures. These are like almost like self-governance units, although they are informal. So the Uzbek government works with them or through them in delivering social assistance. They know who are the needy. They know, also how to deliver aid and social assistance, and they are the ones, providing the social safety net at the end of the day. And this is so much more effective than any bureaucrat doing it from the capital city. And again, when you talk to the Uzbeks, this is what they will also point out. And you see the results. You see the results not only in terms of welfare, but even in terms of how clean the streets are in Uzbekistan, because people take care not only, of every aspect of their community, be it the cleanliness or the situation of the disabled, the elderly, and the children. And this is something, again, we all ought to learn from. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's already, so I think it's time for us to stop. We're already past 12, but that is a testimony on how much the topic is important and the discussion is going on thanks to our great panelists. I would like to remind our participants that the report is available on the website of our partners, but also we will post it on the Central Asia Program website. You will be able to watch the video on our YouTube channel in a few hours. So please stay in touch and read the report. Really great element for discussion. I would like to thank all our participants for joining us today, especially Your Excellency and all our 5 speakers. So once again, thank you for being here today with us. Wish you all good. Please stay safe, and we'll be in touch very soon with other forthcoming event. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Marlene.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.